Welcome everyone to the new episode of Behind the Success. In every episode, we have been talking about various topics which are so important in our day to day life. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about technology and the role of technology in our day to day life because I believe in some capacity, we all are wired to technology. And in some capacity, technology has become part of our day to day life. So, today's episode, we have Scott with us. Scott has an experience of last 25 years working specifically with technology. He has helped various organizations to bring a lot of innovations on ground. He has been working with uh, companies like Vodafone, Qualcomm, and IHS Market, and has served them as senior technology and on marketing roles for multinationals. Uh, Today, Scott is an independent technology analyst and has created his own organization with the website. That is interesting. Well, that's interesting.tech as platform to showcase purpose-driven technology for companies and leaders. Currently, Scott is also associated with prestigious Mobile World Congress Awards, and he has featured into two categories this year. One is specifically is around UN SDGs. Welcome, Scott. I am really delighted to have you on board for today's episode, and I'm really looking forward because I believe technology is somewhere. It's somewhere part of our day-to-day schedule, and it also eases our life. But also, on one side, it increases a lot of distractions for us as well. So, I'm looking forward to have a larger discussion on that with you today.
Gaurav, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to it as well.
Thank you. So before we get into the further details, my first question is that if you can quickly explain what exactly you are doing right now. And I'm also a big fan of Simon Sinek, so I would like to know that why, because a lot of times we do explain people about what we're doing and how we're doing it, but also it's important to talk about why we are doing what we're doing. So I would like to know what you're doing briefly, and also the why or your own inspiration behind it.
Okay, the why is a big reason to the what, really. So the what is, I run, as you said, this the website, well, that's interesting.tech, and I've created this platform that is really trying to showcase these technologies, the leaders, the companies that are trying to make the world a better place for us, one way or another. So I focus all of that on how these companies are aligning themselves, either accidentally or on purpose, with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And my role is to give them the platform to help them be seen, help them find the audience they need to be successful. And if I can help them be successful, then I'm successful. That's ultimately what I'm trying to do. The why, it was quite a few years to come up with my why. But yeah, I am now a converted fan of the why question. And if you keep asking the why question enough, ultimately you'll get to a point where you understand what you're trying to do. And it took me many years of asking why. But why I'm doing this now is because I've had the privilege of doing some amazing things with technology. I've had the privilege of seeing some amazing things and going to amazing places all over the world. And now I think we are at a crisis point in many ways. The climate is, I think, the one that has galvanized our interest and our awareness and our kind of action. But there are many others, which is kind of why I like focusing on the SDGs. And I think, the why I want to do it is I want to leave. It's a cliche, I suppose, but let's not, a cliche is there for that reason. I want to leave the world in a better place than I was given it. And I have 4 children, and I do worry really how much of the world will be there when they're my age. So it's about that. It's about we've got vast inequalities across this planet. and our problems only seem to be amplifying and growing. So I want to try and find these technologies that are going to help us solve some of those problems.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And since you mentioned about, leaving the planet as a better place, my next question to you is that I believe technology has a lot of transformation over the years, and I'm sure in last 25 years for you, you have seen like drastic changes in terms of technology moving. Where do you see us as human species evolving along with technology now?
It's interesting what you say about technology evolving and how much I've seen it evolve. It is true, of course. Technology has been moving on along at a rapid pace, but also back in 1996, I graduated from cybernetics and control engineering, Reading University, and back then I created a robot that learned to move, a robot that learned to effectively hunt in its own special way. We were studying virtual reality, we were studying augmented reality, autonomous vehicles. So it seems like it's taken a long time for the things that we were doing in a very rudimentary way back in '96 to finally start come into our lives in kind of 2021. So I think the underlying pieces of technology have moved tremendously, but many things haven't moved as fast as we like to think they have, which I think is an interesting conundrum to wrap your head around. So where we're moving, I think, as a human, the human race, it's a very interesting kind of journey forward. I think we're terrified about things like the singularity. So AI will come and take all of our jobs, and we'll be living on kind of universal income and that kind of thing. But if you look back through time, our paranoia about modern technologies is cyclical. I did a talk a couple of years ago, and I tried to look up some of the fear mongering that was going on with technologies over the decades. And there was one, I found a news article that was in the kind of the early introduction of the railroads. And they were saying, they were warning women not to go on the trains because the trains would move so fast. Brace yourself for this. The trains would move so fast that it would literally rip the wombs from the women. And I think, if you think about that nowadays, it's actually absurd to think about that. But that was a genuine fear that was being propagated through the media at the time. So I think we can look back through all of these things and look at the fear that was created. The fear will guide us in some extent away from some things, but it will hinder us in others.
Yep.
I don't think we're moving towards the kind of singularity that we worry about. Now, I don't want to look back in 10 years and find out that I was totally wrong, but I don't think we are. I think if we're careful and we do things together, which is a really big question. I know just today at the NATO in the NATO discussions, I think two state leaders, including I live in Slovakia at the moment. This is a picture of the wilderness around me. That's not wilderness, that's a crop field, but we'll talk about that later. The president of Slovakia was saying, okay, enough of talking about climate change, enough writing papers and all of this stuff. We now need to act. And I think we need to come together and act on many of these things that we know are problems. And if we do that correctly, then I think that we can turn away from this world where we currently live, where technology seems to be our master. We're glued to our screens, we're glued to our phones, we're glued to social media. We do whatever the algorithms tell us to. And we can find a way for technology to be much more of our servant. But that's going to take a lot of deliberatism. We really are going to have to focus on that. So I'm an optimist, or sometimes I call myself a pesso-optimist. I think about the bad in order to try and help myself think about how good things could be as well.
And I believe that's a very interesting point of view to also see. And since you talked about we being consumer, I have the next question where I've been curious to know that a lot of times people say that technology is a product, but now there are certain certain social media channels, certain products coming up where a human species is actually becoming a product. So, how do you see the entire debate going up? What is your point of view in terms of the shift or the transition we are making? And in overall, how do you, explain what's happening around?
Hmm. So the saying, if there's no if the product costs nothing, then you're the product. I think we are the product already, whether we like it or not. It's our attention, it's our capabilities that we're being used for. So we are the product. I think there's a slow awakening to that fact, and I think we'll see that evolve over time. But I think technology is always kind of sat at that tipping point between liberating us and capturing us.
Hmm.
Um, and this deliberatism that I was talking about earlier on, we need to understand more about um, the motivations behind the technologies that are capturing us in order for us to be able to be liberated from them, and use them as our servant rather than as our master. So I think that is where the battleground for humanity, as we kind of hope it will sit in that pivot point between being captured and enslaved, kind of the singularity scaremongering, and being able to use it for the things that we want to use it to be able to give us the lives and the opportunities that we want. So yeah, I think it's a delicate balance, but we need to be aware, and I don't think enough of us are aware at the moment.
Right. And also, to viewers, I would also like to share, as per my personal understanding, what I've understood is that you have to understand the role of technology in your day-to-day life. For me, I would say this is about bringing efficiency and also increasing my quality of life. So whenever I see that whatever I'm doing or the technology is not fitting in these two parameters as per today, I would prefer finding ways to connect and disconnect in my own ways, because at the end it's extremely important also to keep my design thinking alive, to focus on my natural abilities which has been there. So I would say maybe you can find the ways to practice both the mechanism where technology is helping you becoming more efficient, but you're also able to find your own me time in order to reflect, in order to take decisions, in order to build your willpower. So that's something also my personal understanding, in order to summarize what Scott already mentioned. Scott, my next question to you is more around that you have experience of working with uh, different organizations and technologies. Do you see any innovative project you have worked upon, which is something, let's say, very close to your heart? And can you do you feel comfortable sharing that with us?
Hmm. Yeah. So I'm I'm lucky enough to work. Yeah, basically the thing every day I work on a new project, I learn something new. And actually later this week, I'm taking part in a learning and development webinar. And I kind of was thinking to myself, what do I know about learning and development? Well, it's like I do it every day. Um, so there's so many fascinating things. I could tell you about. There's a company I worked with called Object Box out of Berlin, and they were looking at how you could keep data from IoT devices at the edge of a network. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of dull, to be honest. But when I started trying to think about, well, why is this important? I stumbled across an enormous number.
Right.
So if you look at the forecast of IoT devices that they expect to be on the planet, and you start to think about data volumes, then the amount of data that these IoT things could generate is 79.4 zettabytes. That's an enormous number. And then when you start thinking about that, then every piece of data has an environmental cost, whether it's transmitted or stored, so it's in transit or at rest. So data has a cost to the environment. 79.4 zettabytes. When you turn that into carbon dioxide equivalent, it's just blows everything on this planet out of the water. It's just enormous, to the point where I had to ask 5 people to double check my work because it just seemed absurd. But in terms of 79.4 zettabytes, I started trying to think, well, how do I visualize this? So I thought, well, let's take a byte and turn it into a human. And if we put a human into a red London bus, how many London buses would we fill? And it was 993 quintillion, which again is a large number. So if I stuck these buses next to each other, how big was it? And it would span, I can't remember how many kilometers, but I can tell you it is bigger than the Milky Way. So, I mean, things like that just blow my mind, and I love that. Then there's another company that was doing emotional intelligence or emotional measurement within virtual reality, a company called MTech Labs in the UK. And that's really fascinating because the power of virtual reality for our lives is incredible in terms of learning, in terms of therapy. I mean, I won't go into the numbers here; they're quite eye-opening. But it's an incredible, very powerful way to create empathy and to help us learn. It's even more powerful if you can understand the human reaction to what they're doing, because then you can make it a more stimulating environment or a less stimulating environment. And I found digging into that and understanding that very interesting in terms of the capability, but also it opened my eyes to this question about us being the product and the data. The potential risk that we face if we blindly walk into this metaverse kind of scenario that many of the big social platforms are heading towards, this idea where we connect all of these digital worlds together and we live in them and we interact in them. I don't know if you know, but there have been studies done in Stanford University to determine the sexual orientation of a user within a virtual environment, and they can do it in milliseconds. There's other things as soon as, so that to me was an eye-opener because it made me realize these virtual worlds, if we think we've lost power and control over our data in the physical world with the mobile phones that we have and all of that, when we step into virtual worlds, we need to be even more aware. I'll give you probably one more. Air quality is a big passion of mine as well. So I've conducted several experiments of mine back in, I think it's 2018 now, quite a while ago, when I realized that at that time you could go to Google and you could type in AQI, air quality index, and then the town name, and it would tell you, it would give you the kind of air quality index and nice red, amber, green scale as to kind of how bad or how good the air quality was in that town. And I was living in Reading at the time in the UK, and it said, oh, it was all green, it was all lovely. But when I stepped outside, I could smell smoke. And it wasn't the first day that I could step outside and smell smoke. I could smell these pollutants in the air, even though this thing was telling me that it was all green and lovely and fine. And what I realized was somebody down the road had installed a wood burner, and they were burning wood, and that was polluting my air. And that led me to the conclusion that these models that we have currently to understand air quality are done on sparsely captured data points and then modeled. But they have no idea that your neighbor is burning tires. They have no idea that you've got this pollutant coming off of the construction area nearby. So I'm really starting to look at what's called these I've called it the hyperlocal air quality. And one of the companies that submitted a submission for the GLOMO awards that you mentioned at the beginning was KT, so KT Telecom, Korea Telecom. What they've done is they've been able to deploy sensors, air quality sensors, across a good proportion of their mobile infrastructure, meaning that they've now got one of the world's most distributed air quality sensing networks. Another company working really hard on this is DPD, the couriers. So they've got, if you go to, I think it's green.dpd.co.uk or .com, you can see what they're doing. And they've worked with a French company called Polytrax to install air quality sensors in all of their vehicles. And they're creating and capturing an amount of data that's just been unheard of before. But this is going to really determine lives. 8 million people a year die from air quality alone, air quality related diseases. So that for me is another really, really important project for me to be involved in.
Thank you for sharing that. And I definitely, you talked about variety of, or I would say, diverse technologies and your experience with that. Now, since your bio also talked about your alignment with SDGs. And since we talked about the diverse missions, I would like to know that how do you see that technology can actually help us achieve sustainable development goals faster, or do you feel that uh, the pace is not proportional to technology? What is your take on that?
That's a great question. So I let me just backtrack a second onto what I love about the SDGs, and why I've decided to focus everything I do on the SDGs. Um, I've actually got this in my office twice, but you won't see the one behind me because of the virtual screen. But I know you won't see me. How about that? It just disappeared. But you know these things, right? The thing I love about them is they're ambitious. I mean, to achieve some of these things, I frankly, my peso optimist again, I don't think we're going to achieve some of these things, not in my lifetime, let alone 2030. But to have this stretch goal to get somewhere close to them, I think is audacious. And it's definitely a challenge that we as humanity needs to address. The other thing that I love is when I'm on the other side of this table and doing a video interview, I've often asked people, if you could only pick two, which two would you pick and why?
Yeah.
And it's incredibly difficult because you don't have to dig too far into one of them to find that it's inextricably linked to many of the others as well. And that's life, right? We're all connected somehow. We're connected to the planet, this philosophy of Gaia as well. It's a big cybernetic environment. And actually we studied it in cybernetics, the philosophy of Gaia. So I love it because of that. It's bold, it's ambitious, it's interconnected. And for me, it helps me and what I hope other technology companies and leaders and civilians and normal people like me without that hat on and the rest of the family, helps us try and have a common vocabulary. And I think when we were talking earlier on about that kind of collective action, the deliberatism that we need, then we need to have a collective vocabulary. So do I think the SDGs are perfect? No, I don't think they are. Is there a lot of room for development? Yes, I think there is. But is it a good framework? Is it a good set of tools? Yeah, I think it's great. So coming back to your question now with that in mind, how do I think that technology is going to help speed these up? In many ways, in many ways, but I think first of all, we need to not rely on technology to be the answer. Technology won't be the answer. It will be part of the answer, and we need to use technology as a tool. But ultimately, we need to use us to achieve these goals. So technology, in the very basic sense of things, it could be used just to make us communicate better. It could be used like we're doing now to share our messages, to involve other people, to engage with other people. It could be used like a company I worked with, a company called Dryad Networks. They've created this wildfire sensing system that allows firefighters to be notified of a fire before it even becomes a fire. So when it's smoldering, they aim to be able to stop, I can't remember the number of wildfires, but billions of tons of carbon dioxide being entered into the atmosphere every year. So that could be a major breakthrough. Obviously, you got carbon capture technologies like one that comes to mind is Climeworks, where if they can be invested in a way that is similar to fossil fuels. Not to get too political here. I don't want to. That's not my realm. That's somebody else's realm to get political. Yeah. But if they can have the same kind of investment and backing and to be able to achieve what they're doing without creating even more problems, then this could be a fantastic technology as well. Because if you have a look at Climeworks and go and find, there's a video with the CEO where he talks about the technology. Another thing that they can do is not just capture the carbon out of the air, but turn that carbon into fuels that are basically drop-in replacements to gasoline and diesel. So we wouldn't have to change all of our cars and all our fleets on the road. We could just use a different type of diesel, a different type of fuel to pour into our tanks. That could be fantastic, I think, if it's viable commercially and practically. So I think there's lots of ways there. I think when I get asked, what technologies do I like to focus on my work? Quite honestly, the technology doesn't matter. I was talking to a company based in Pakistan doing some work in Africa, and they're making some huge inroads, huge impacts in some of the communities they're working out there, simply using a technology that in my part of the world. And actually, I use this term worlds. You know, we live on the same planet in different worlds, and we could be standing next to each other and in different worlds on the same planet. So in my world, and my world has changed quite a bit in the last 2 to 3 years. The technology that they're using in Africa, I've forgotten about years ago. They're basically using USSD commands on the in basic phones, but these are allowing them to create businesses, run businesses, to get to get loans, to get finance, and it's changing lives. So technology can use from the very basic stuff to implement services, change lives. It can help us communicate, share messages. We can come together around things, and ultimately, hopefully, we can use it, multiple technologies, to solve some of the problems that they've created.
Right. It's I believe it's very interesting perspective and a point of view to see both sides, and I'm glad you're talking about half glass full and half glass empty while answering a lot of questions, and it actually gives uh, both shades to our listeners and viewers about uh, how they can expand their thought process around it. Coming to that, I would also say that a lot of times there are a lot of learnings, because eventually when you're working for a while into particular industry, I'm super sure this has been with you as well, that there has been certain key lessons maybe who has shaped you as a different person. And I'm using the word specifically different person because at times it has a positive impact and also a negative impact. So I would give you the freedom completely to answer in your own capacity.
So just what is my? Are you asking what's kind of my biggest learning and kind of who inspired me and to become a different person?
Yes.
So, on this journey to the why that we talked about right at the beginning, it's taken me, I would say, probably 4 years to kind of, maybe longer. I think it started, actually definitely longer. I think it probably started around 2008, where I had a very exciting job offer from an international company. They hunted me down and we talked about it with the hiring manager, and it was amazing. It was really great. And then he handed me over to HR, and we had the most ridiculous conversations, and we just kind of parted company. And I said to myself, I'm never going to work for a big company again. And that was kind of, notch on notch on the wall number one. And then over my time, I kind of started off as this technologist. I kind of drifted into marketing, and then somehow I ended up in sales roles and business development roles. And I would talk to other people in sales, and I would express my kind of frustration on kind of motivation, and they're like, "Well, you don't get the rush when you close a deal." I'm like, nope. Nope, that doesn't do it for me. Right. Oh, you don't. So I realized that I'm not really into sales like that. What I like to do is I like to find ways that people can work together and something comes, collaboratively better out of that. And if that's sales, then that's sales. And there was the CEO of a startup from Seattle I worked with. He once told me in Barcelona when we were coming out of a meeting, he goes, "For somebody who's not sales, you're the best non-sales salesperson I've ever known." And I'm like, well, I think that's a compliment. I'm not entirely sure. But out of that was another learning. That was, I don't want to be in sales. And then these kind of things came around, and then that company got acquired, and I worked in this $30 billion company out of London. And one Tuesday morning, I was standing at a window washing dishes, looking out at a very grey sky, and I realized I was working in a big organization, and I was running a sales team with a sales quota. Like, how did that happen? Sorry, not entirely sure how that happened. so the lesson, again, it came back. I don't want to be in sales. I don't want to do. I don't want to be in a big company. So, what do you want to do was the big question I had. And then after the what do you want to do, it was really why. And there was another company I worked for, and I won't say too much about them because it would be easy to figure out who they are. But I realized that if I stopped doing the thing I was doing and delivering the thing I was doing, no one would care. That was really depressing. I'm putting all this time and effort into it to be rewarded in a way I didn't find rewarding, only to realize that people don't really care. So again, I felt that if all of this coming together, I really needed to do something that I cared about, that other people cared about, and actually made a difference. So this all led me to my why, and some of the people that led me along that journey. Obviously, the CEO who said you're the best non-sales salesperson I've ever known really drummed it into me that it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're probably selling some way. And you don't have to think of it as selling, it's something else. So that was a really good one. I worked with one of the original marketing board members at Oracle and he drummed it into me at the time. He was an advisor on one of our boards. He drummed it into me. So what? If you can't answer the so what in the first 10 seconds, then nobody's going to care. So I was like, okay, that's a good one. So what? And then I guess there was just so many. One more, another sales guy. He said, learn how to fail faster. So learn when to give up on something, but also learn when it's the right time to keep persevering. And that's, putting all those together, they've really, really helped. But that's all on the professional side. There's been a lot more kind of personal exploration as well. In the last 4 years, I've taken up meditating. I've taken up really more mindful practices and really started trying to visualize these things and really get closer to them like that as well. So there's been a lot of, let's call them teachers along that journey as well, that are too many to mention, really.
Great. Since you talked about visualization, my next question is more about visualization. And now what I would want is that consider that everything is possible and there is no limits when it comes to this question. I would like to know, I mean, if you have given an opportunity to create a new world, or I would say, let's say 10 years down the line, what kind of technology driven world you would like to live in?
Okay. Excellent question. So firstly, I don't think I'd want it to be a technology driven world. I would want it to be a human driven world. Actually, let me just touch on one thing there as well.
Sure.
We'll come back to this question because it's related, I think. I think that some of the problem we have with climate change, some of the other problems we have to do with the planet, has been a bit of a misbranding. So my belief here is that we're kind of ultimately selfish creatures, that through kind of evolution we've become selfish and looked after our genetic growth. So I think we find it hard when people say we must act now to save the planet. I don't think many people really get that. Many people really care. Some do, absolutely. And when people really think about it and are forced to think about it, they get it. But instinctively, they don't get it. It's a bit like save the whales. You have some people who are absolutely passionate about it. It doesn't have to be whales. It could be tigers. It could be elephants. It could be whatever. But other people, it's, what about me? I think the problem we're facing here is not save the planet. The planet will survive. No matter what we do to it, it's going to survive, right? Life will survive. It always has on this planet so far, and it will continue to survive. The thing that won't survive is us. So I really think that the branding shouldn't be save the planet, save the wildlife, save this. I think it should be save humanity, and then everything else drops out from that, I think, because, again, the interconnectedness of the SDGs. So in terms of that future vision, I think it should be humanity driven. We should really be thinking about humanity and all the things that are important to us. Because if we don't have life on land, if we don't have life below the sea, if we don't have a good climate, then we won't exist. And if we do have humanity, then we need to be able to feed ourselves and be prosperous and safe and healthy and all of these things. And we need to work together. So it all links together. So your question, technology-driven world, let's call it a human-driven world powered by or enabled with technology. Firstly, I would love to have, and if you've asked this to lots of participants then and guests, then I'm sure you've heard this, endless clean energy, please. Just let's take that equation. We're only ever going to need more energy. So let's make that clean. And that's going to solve a lot of problems if we can do that. So endless clean energy. And then I think I've been blessed to travel so much, but I also wear that as a bit of a shameful badge of honor as well. I think I generated about 800,000 air miles in my earlier career, which is quite a lot. And I probably will never pay that back in terms of carbon reduction, but I'm trying. So I would love to be able to travel anywhere at any time, interact with that environment as if I was there, and love and enjoy that environment as if I was there, but without leaving a negative impact. So I'd love that. Other things that come to mind is, so I'd love this technology to make it easier to enjoy, protect, and encourage our interaction with our ecosystems, whether it's our local ecosystems, our communities, our broader ecosystems, the planet, or even go beyond the planet as well. Let's think about that as well. How do we interact with the galaxy? Again, a bit crazy here. But then I think for us to enjoy all of that stuff as well, you've got to think about health. I'm not necessarily one to think about limitless lifespans or extending the lifespan too much, but I'm much more interested in health span. So if we live to 90 or 120, fine, but it would be nice to live, those 90 or 120 years healthily and to be able to enjoy it. So I think technology to help us with that. And then I don't know how we would do this, but one thing that, if we're not going to talk about infinite lifespans, which would be, I think, dangerous and crazy, I think we need to find a way to help us all maybe better deal with the inevitable loss of life. And that kind of leads on to kind of health and mental health topics. And I think mostly, whatever this technology is out there, I don't know where my phone is, the thing that I've talked about for a while is, I think this behavior of staring at your phone and being blocked from reality with your phone, or whether it's virtual reality goggles or whatever it is, I want to believe that's transient. I want to believe that's an evolution of where we're going to get to, that these things would disappear disappear like that at some point because we won't need them. I want technology to become transparent and powerful, but inclusive. So including the people around us, and those including all of us somehow together. So you asked me to think big. So hopefully that's big enough.
Definitely. And I'm glad that you talked about clean energy. You talked about readjusting the focus and seeing planet from a new perspective. And I'm really, I would say you made my evening by saying that. Thank you for sharing that. With this, we move to the second segment, which is called Spotlight. And here, both usually me and all our guests share their recommendations with our listeners about a movie, a book, or a documentary. Whatever they feel like could be an interesting thing for them to read and watch. So, from my point of view, since you talked about in the specifically last question, my recommendation would be a book called Ikigai, which is a very popular Japanese book. And it's actually a survey being done in a village where usually people have a lifespan of around 104, 105 years. And this really talks about not just healthy but also happy life. So uh, it gives you a different understanding about understanding how to live a happy and long life. And it talks about certain elements about how to be active thoroughly throughout the life, how you can enjoy your work, how to adjust your meal according to your life, and all of that. So that would be my recommendation to our listeners. I would pass on batting to you, Scott, now for your recommendation.
Okay, so let me not ramble too much, but maybe just two. So for the younger listeners, I don't know what your demographic is, but I was speaking to Penn State University the other day, and for the younger demographic, I would say look up an essay in the 90s that was turned into a song. The song was called Baz Luhrmann's "Everyone's Free to Wear Sunscreen," and the if you look that up, you'll find the essay. It's very similar. But when you listen to the lyrics, it is absolutely spot on. So for the younger listeners, I mean, kind of late 20s, you probably won't have heard that. It came out in the late 90s, and it's very sage advice, including one bit which says, "Be careful whose advice you listen to, and be
Right.
patient with those who share it." So that's a very good thing for the younger listeners. I think another one that I have found mind-boggling is by Neil Howell and William Strauss. It's called The Fourth Turning. So this was written again, probably late 90s, I think. And they're looking at the American political system and kind of geopolitics. So it's quite a heavy book. But they're describing our social structures as seasons. And by understanding them as seasons and looking back, I think they looked all the way back through to the 17th century. You can see how you can see kind of human summer, autumn, winter, and spring, and how our different societies have evolved and how technology has kind of fed into those. And what it means when you have for example, an elderly autumn-born population leading and making decisions when you have a younger spring population kind of growing up and maturing, and that dynamic between them. And the last winter was in kind of the 1911 to 1948, which was a particularly bad time for humanity. And we are, I think, currently just approaching another winter. And the prediction is that the winters only ever get worse, which is a pretty sobering thought, really, if you think back to the world wars of 19 kind of First World War, Second World War, 1940, 1940s. And then think maybe we're into something slightly worse than that. But the optimism is that it's a cycle. And he kind of paints this picture of how things can get better and how things will get better. So I thoroughly recommend that one as well.
Thank you. Thank you once again for both of your recommendations. I will also ensure that we share the links of, the book and the song so that people can access it very easily. I would also like to thank you for the whole interview, and I am super sure that it has been very inspirational to talk about variations of how technology is impacting our lives. And I'm sure listeners will have their own point of views once they listen to whole of it. And I'm definitely super pumped that a lot of us will start thinking about clean energy and also being conscious about how we are producing and consuming the resources. So, Scott, thank you for being part of the show. And I'm really grateful to have you on the show. And I'm sure people are going to love the interview.
All right. Thank you so much indeed. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for the really, really interesting questions.
Thank you. I would like to thank all of you for listening. And I will be looking forward to all of you in our upcoming episodes. Thank you very much.